Hello, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. It's 8:01 p.m. on April 19th, 2024. I should have said 8:01 p.m. Eastern Time, of course. Our topic for tonight is part two of Michael Hudson and Radhika Desai on the U.S. economic war with China. I'm going to share the screen and this very long article with you. Here it is. Okay, there we are. I do want to do a couple of things before we go into it. First, I want to share it on Facebook to make sure it gets shared over there. And then I want to start off by pointing out that last night we ended the stream over at Dee's show talking about the new Israeli attack, on Iran and some targets in Syria, and Iraq. It became clear today that this Israeli attack was a relatively minor effort. It appeared to be a face-saving exercise by the Netanyahu regime. It doesn't look like Iran will mobilize at this point, to retaliate against it, though I don't know for sure whether this is the case. But it hardly seemed worth a retaliation. But I may be mistaken about that. In any case, for the time being, it appears that the pressure is off, of any immediate actions, in this area. Of course, there is the news, that the United States did something at the General Assembly, at the Security Council, where it vetoed the resolution for a Palestinian state. This elicited very tough criticism from China and Russia and many states. There were some who thought the United States did this in part because they made a deal with Israel. And the deal was that if Israel moderated its retaliation against the Iranian attack, that the U.S. Would make a public statement that it would never vote for Palestinian membership until there was a peace agreement on the table between the Palestinians and the Israeli state. And of course, if as long as the Israeli state sticks with its position that there will be no Palestine, this in effect would give a veto to Israel over whether the United States would ever recognize a Palestinian state. So this, of course, is a very high price to pay and a very dicey thing to do if, in fact, that's what was done. But it's not completely clear that was done, so it's just something to keep in mind at this point. Back to the Radhika Desai, Michael Hudson piece on how the U.S. is waging war on China. And I will now start to work on that with you. Let me find our stopping place just yesterday. Last thing we covered after covering quite a number of subjects was the shipbuilding industry and the ridiculous decline of the shipbuilding industry here in the United States.
Itch. I just took 2 allergy pills.
Okay. Okay, it's good. Hang on a second, everybody. This little problem Bonnie has, and I have to talk to Okay, Bonnie has had an allergy reaction to something, an allergic reaction to something. So she's taking some allergy pills, but we don't know if they're going to work, of course. So let me get to the stopping place where we were. Okay, we stopped with the transition to Janet Yellen's trip, to the United States. We stopped here. And Radhika Desai said, Hudson said, well, that's why Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is in China now. Shall we go in to discuss? And Radhika said, absolutely. Go ahead, Michael. And Michael says, she's essentially there to make a number of demands. She's accusing China of, she's essentially there to make a number of demands. She's accusing China of monopolizing clean energy goods, the battery technology, all the things that you mentioned before. She says this is driving down the prices of global energy, of batteries, of everything else China produces. There is no way that American industry can compete with that. So you've got to stop exporting these things. Why don't you just support things for your own consumers? And why don't you stop exporting? Michael says, this is almost hilarious. Yeah, I think it's hilarious too. It's ridiculous. And she's used, and the media in America uses a kind of vocabulary. I think we should get used to a new word. It's not a new word, but it's in the dictionary, and it's called cacophonism. It's the opposite, okay, of euphemism. A euphemism paints lipstick on a pig. It makes something pretty bad look good. Well, Yellen has gone through the entire vocabulary of cacophonism, making everything that China is doing good looking, is doing good, looking bad. For instance, she says, quote, to export, unquote, is, quote, overproduction, unquote. Well, any country that exports produces something more than it produces at home. The only way to avoid overproduction by producing more than you do at home is not to export anything. That's what she's asking China to do. Don't overproduce. Consume everything at home. Stop making exports. That's a pretty crazy thing, says Michael Hudson. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And according to Reuters, U.S. Treasury officials said that Yellen was going to, quote, make clear the global economic consequences of Chinese industrial overcapacity, undercutting manufacturers in the U.S. and firms around the world. I couldn't have made that up for description of why the United States is so upset with China or any country that is following an industrial policy instead of a post-industrial policy. So the U.S. is approaching with its own agenda. Congress is using that word Yellen is going to use too of, quote, dumping, unquote, its products. Well, dumping means selling below cost. And Yellen's definition of selling below cost is anything that's not done by a market economy, meaning anything that's done with government support. Well, every economy that's successful is a mixed economy with government support. And in fact, China has opened a complaint with the World Trade Organization challenging Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which is a huge subsidy of hundreds of billions of dollars to try to support U.S. information technology and chip making technology. And China has protested the trade barriers that America is doing, that America is leading the fight against the free trade that it was supporting, as long as the United States, after World War II, could undersell Europe and other countries because there was a war that destroyed their economies. But now that the United States can't undersell them, it says, well, you're dumping if your government helps you. Our government can help our agriculture with all of our huge government parity support for agriculture, for all the special support we're giving for the war industry, for all of these. But if other countries' government can subsidize, China produces public transportation at a much lower price than America. That's called cheating and dumping. Well, you can just see how the vocabulary is being twisted and taken away. And China, Yellen has even accused China of currency manipulation because when it gets these dollars for its exports, it puts them in the central bank and holds U.S. Treasury bonds, just like other central banks are dollarized. Well, there's no question China's trying to de-dollarize as quickly as it can. But of course, if it didn't hold the U.S. Treasury bonds, its currency would go way up. So by manipulating currency, that means not letting its currency appreciate, so much as to price China exports out of the market, just like the Swiss currency for flight capital rose so much that Switzerland couldn't manufacture industrial goods anymore. You're having a whole twisted vocabulary of American diplomacy. And you're having a Reagan official, Robert Lichtauer, attributing part of the whole blame on China's mercantile practices, which is simply the way that America, Germany, and every other country got rich. Intel, especially the firm that is a foundry for making chips and also designs, has asked for, I think, $200 billion of support in the CHIPS bill. I would imagine some Chinese official, if they actually sit down for lunch with Ms. Yellen, they can get a word in when she stops making demands, can point out the double standard that's been used. But she doesn't care about the double standard. She'll just go, plow right ahead and say that, well, the fact is, of course, they both use government subsidies. Every country has a government sector. And the American government sector is, I think, 40% of the economy. So there's no such thing as a market economy without governments because that's part of the government. So I think that the warning, Yellen is really there to make threats and just say that, well, Biden originally attacked Trump in the 2020 election. He attacked Trump saying China raised exports in China's goods. Look how awful that is. Well, he came in 2020 and he kept Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods. And now he's trying to raise the tariffs on Chinese goods. The exact opposite of what he said to do. Well, this is making the U.S. companies, especially the information technology companies, scream because they said, wait a minute, if we can't import goods from China, then we're going to have to raise our prices, and we don't have the capacity to produce these goods at home. There's going to be a huge interruption. And instead of, we're going to have the effect now, it's as if you've gone to war already with China, not preparing for 10 years to try to pry everything away. So Biden and Yellen have nothing to offer China. I look forward to what the press will say about her trip there, because there's really nothing that can be said except demands that China can just laugh at. China can say, well, if it really matters to you, instead of you raising tariffs by 30%, I think they might say, why don't we just raise our export tariff by 30%? Instead of the U.S. government treasury getting the tariff proceeds, why doesn't the Chinese government get the tariff proceeds? And for every 10% that America imposes illegal tariffs on China's goods, China should impose a matching 10% export charge on goods to the United States. Say, hey, you want to be independent? This is independent. Well, it's not exactly the kind of sanctions that NATO put against Russia, but that's the kind of war that we're going to get into. And the first victim, as usual, will be the customers of China, America, and presumably the NATO countries of Europe. If America can convince them to import less from China, which NATO is already telling China, why don't you buy more from us and balance the trade? And I think China said, oh, why don't you sell us the chip-making equipment and all the good capital goods that Holland and other countries make. And NATO says, oh, we're not allowed to send you anything that involves national security. So China, I think, will say, well, then, I guess we have nothing to talk about. Radhika Desai says, right, Michael. And I just wanted to also speak about Janet Yellen's visit and her claims about Chinese dumping and so on, and raise a couple of slightly different points from the ones that you had raised, which, by the way, Radhika always does. But so let's look at this. This is from CNBC. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Wednesday warned that China is treating the global economy as a dumping ground for its cheaper clean energy products, depressing market prices and squeezing green manufacturing in the U.S. I'm concerned about global spillovers from the excess capacity that we are seeing in China. During a speech at a Georgia solar company called Suniva, China's overcapacity distorts global prices and production patterns and hurts American firms, workers, as well as firms and workers around the world. Now, there are a couple of things really worth looking at. Number one is that according to Yellen herself, she points out that China produces clean energy products more cheaply. Well, isn't it supposed to be a law of the market that those who are able to produce more cheaply should be triumphant in the market? No. On the one hand, the U.S. administration officials like Ms. Yellen want to talk about the virtues of the market. On the other hand, they want to complain about the effects of the market. So that's the first thing. And of course, it's the fact that China is able to produce these goods more cheaply only means that China has advanced productive capacities sufficiently far that these products are available really very cheaply. And in the United States, it's not just that it's because of higher wages in the U.S. that are not available cheaply. It's also because the companies are unwilling to invest in the most efficient methods of production. That's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing I wanted to say is that what Mrs. Yellen is calling overcapacity is really very important. Now, if you think about it in one way, overcapacity has been a problem allegedly plaguing the world economy for about 50 years. One would say that the crisis of the 1970s emerged precisely because there was overcapacity and overproduction, particularly in relation to existing demand. Now, in itself, industrial capacity is a good thing. To complain about overcapacity is to say that somebody else should shut down their productive capacity and allow our productive capacity to flourish. Well, instead of playing this kind of zero-sum game, there's actually another way of dealing with it, which is why not expand global demand? Because if global demand increases, then there would not be overcapacity. Indeed, if you think about it, considering that so much of the world lives in poverty, needs the roads, the green technology, the hospitals, the buildings, the food, the clothing, all sorts of manufactured goods, the world needs more of it, of course, produced in a green way. So the problem is not overcapacity. And to frame it as a problem of overcapacity is excuse me while I do this. To frame it as a problem of overcapacity is refuse to resolve the fundamental problem that has been plaguing the world economy for 50 years and more now, which is that there is deficient demand. And there is deficient demand because too much of the world is poor. So why not develop the productive capacities of the world and therefore the ability to demand goods? So that's the first couple of points that I want to make. There's also another point I want to make, which is that so what Mrs. Yellen is complaining about is that in China, there has been a rapid growth in three industries in particular, which Ms. Yellen, I should have said Ms. Yellen, is complaining about. First is battery production. The second is new vehicle production, new energy vehicle production. That's the red line. And finally, wind and solar power generation capacity. You can see that certainly in two of the three cases, and also in the third case, there have been remarkable increases in China's productive capacity since about 2020. So, and this is what Ms. Yellen is complaining about. But the fact is that China is making these products available to the rest of the world more cheaply. This will only mean that the world will get on with the business of dealing with climate change more effectively. So that's also really quite important. And the third point I want to make is that this discourse about how China should not be exporting so much and is also aligned with something else we discussed last time in considerable detail, which is the Western officials are essentially saying that China is investing too much and consuming too little. So here's the IMF director, Kristalina Georgieva. She recently made a number of pronouncements on China's growth, and Other things she said, China is poised to face a fork in the road, rely on policies that have worked in the past, or update its policies for a new era of high quality growth. So basically, she's saying China should abandon the old policies which have worked and given it amazing growth. Then she says China could grow considerably faster than a status quo scenario. The additional growth would amount to 20% expansion of the real economy over the next 15 years, adding 3.5 trillion US dollars to the Chinese economy. So she's kind of dangling a statistical carrot saying, if you follow what I'm saying, you will benefit in these ways. But what is she actually asking China to do? She's asking China to increase domestic consumption and, of course, in doing so, increase income growth, which in turn, according to her, relies on increasing the productivity of capital and labor. And here's the key: reforms such as strengthening the business environment and ensuring a level playing field between private and state owned enterprises will improve the allocation of capital. And the fact of the matter is that this advice is precisely the opposite of what has given China its amazing capacity to grow in the past. So, really, as Michael said, not only are Western leaders distorting the truth of Chinese growth and making the good in China look bad, but they're actually giving bad advice to China. And Michael Hudson then says, well, there is a reason that China, the consumption, is not taking the form of goods and services so much. That's because the first Chinese demand is the same demand that middle classes have all over the world. They want to buy the house. So basically, the problem of increasing the domestic market in China is China has to solve the real estate problem. And that means the real estate pricing problem, the idea of the mortgage credit problem. This is exactly what China is debating and trying to go through now. I think in some future program we should go over that. It's a problem all in itself. But there's no recognition in the IMF that the one thing IMF will never talk about and the economists don't talk about is the fire sector: finance, insurance, and real estate. To them, all income is spent on goods and services. They're not talking about the attempt to spend goods income on, as they do in America, on debt service, on buying a house or renting a house. We've said before, just this week, that there was a new census of New York City. The average rent in New York City is $5,500 a month now. Well, how can Americans in other cities actually compete when they have such a high kind of rent? As long as economists, IMF, and the regular professions don't realize that apart from goods and services and employers and wage earners, there's also the financial sector, the insurance sector, and the real estate sector. They're not going to have a realistic view of the economy. And in the US, as you pointed out at the beginning, it's the financial sector that says, use your income to support the stock price, paid out as dividends to raise the price, and use stock buybacks. S&P 500 companies spent 91% of their profits on pushing up the stock price, not R&D. That's happened for decades. That's why China and any other country that's following the Chinese model is going to increase its output. And why, if you follow the American model, you're deindustrializing. That's really what the whole fight is about. And I don't know how Ms. Yellen could bring this up with Biden, that other people at the table are just breaking out in laughter. Radhika Desai says, exactly. And the fact of the matter is there was a report just, I think, this morning in the Financial Times. I couldn't find it just now, but it basically said that the amount of buybacks is reaching such absurd proportions that there's actually a dearth of equities to buy in the U.S. market because basically they've been buying them back at such a rate of knots. But to come back to our main topic, I just want to share this picture with you as well. The fact of the matter is that China, precisely because it is pursuing policies that are opposed to the United States, today, the bulk of these countries of the world have China as its main trading partner. So all of the countries you see here, which are colored in red, their main trading partner is China. All the countries you see that are colored in blue, their main trading partner is the United States. And all the countries you see here colored in orange, their main trading partner is Germany. So the efficiency of Chinese production, the beneficence of the links it offers to the rest of the world, is very clear from this little statement alone. And there's another one of Michael's books, The Bubble and Beyond by Michael Hudson. That was a book around, I think it was around 2007, 2008, if I'm not mistaken. But going on with the article, and probably, Michael, we should be winding down our conversation. But I didn't want to wind it down without showing one other thing, which is this. Because you earlier talked about China's holdings of treasuries, etc. And I just wanted to show this chart, which goes back to 2000 and up to 2024. You can see here from the moment China entered the WTO, because China was essentially such a successful exporter and began to really dominate the world export markets. The flip side of that was its accumulation of U.S. treasuries, which reached a peak in the early 2010s, about 2011, 2012, when China held the most U.S. treasuries, amounting to about 1.3 trillion. But since then, we've seen a relative decline of China's holdings of U.S. treasuries. Oh, so by the way, there's been a sharp decline in the treasuries being held by China, yet there's still no problem in world markets in selling U.S. treasuries, in selling our debt. Everybody was predicting in 2010, 2011, 2012 that we were borrowing too much from China. China obliged and reduced its holdings so that today they're just a little over 750 billion. Going on with the article, and here's the most recent figures that I could find from Reuters. Reuters says the latest figures show that China held 782 billion of treasuries in November, a large amount, but also around its smallest in 15 years, and down significantly from the peaks of 1.3 trillion in 2011 and 2013. More importantly, they say China's footprint in the U.S. bond market is a fraction of what it once was. China owes less than 3% of all outstanding treasuries, the smallest share in 22 years, and again, substantially down from a record of 14% in 2011. So this shows, on the one hand, that we saw in the previous chart here, China has certainly decreased it, but this is an absolute number. But as a proportion of the total outstanding treasuries, it's as small as 3%. Because remember, what has also been happening at the same time, the Federal Reserve has essentially been expanding its balance sheet, including by buying U.S. treasuries, which nobody else will buy. So in my humble opinion, I have no doubt that one of the reasons why Madame Yellen has gone to Beijing to meet her various high-ranking Chinese officials and politicians is because she wants China to step back into the treasury market. Because as we pointed out earlier, the treasury market is not in good shape and it needs other buyers. At the moment, essentially, the bulk of the U.S. treasuries are owned by American entities, of which the Federal Reserve is a major part. Michael Hudson says, that's currency manipulation. That's what you're saying. I would have liked to see the chart on China's gold holdings, because yesterday gold hit an all-time record. And obviously, countries are seeing what the United States is doing to Russia and what it's doing in Palestine, and the Near East. They're all moving out of treasuries because the United States is going to do to other countries what it did to Russia. So, of course, no country wants to put its money at risk by holding dollars. That's what all the shows we've done on de-dollarization. So you can see it all coming to a head right now. Well, Michael, you wanted to see China's gold reserves. I wouldn't say gold holdings. And I'll show you. You wanted to see a chart, so I have summed up a chart for you. Here we go. So this is just from Trading Economics. This is the 2021 figure. And you can see China's gold reserves, these are official holdings. Of course, China also has a large private market in gold. This is just China's gold reserves. And you can see that, yes, exactly at the same rate in which China is dumping dollars or treasuries and not participating as much in the treasury market as it once did, it is also increasing its gold reserves. So, Michael, shall we wrap up? Do you want to say any last few things? Michael Hudson said, "You've done it. We didn't even rehearse this. It's just natural flow of talk." Radhika says, "Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say a couple of things." Radhika's really a riot. I find her a riot. One of the things that comes out in all of this, or to me anyway, the takeaways is that the United States essentially, not only is its economy falling productively, but it seems unable even to undertake the industrial policy that will be necessary to make its industry more competitive, make its industry stronger, make its industry more technologically competent. So its capabilities are low. And what's more, I would add one final point, which is that I would say that given its present political structure, it doesn't seem as though the United States is even going to generate the political will to have industrial policy. Because you see, if you look at the history of industrial policy, we see that industrial policy in developmental states have been successful only in instances where there are non-capitalist ruling classes, such, for example, in late 19th century Germany or in the Soviet Union or today in China, which are able to impose a certain level of discipline on the capitalist classes, or where there is, a socialist economy which is capable of doing that. Whereas today, in the United States, you have a political structure which is completely dominated by politicians who will slavishly do what the corporate capitalist class will want. They have not got the capacity to control the capitalist classes for the greater good of the American economy and of the American people. This is the problem that they have. So if, Michael, you don't want to add anything, we will bring the show to a close. I wanted to say that we hope you enjoyed this. We hope you will like it, and please share it widely. And I also wanted to announce that in our next show, Michael and I, who've been advising the candidate for the Green Party, the presumptive Green Party candidate for president, Jill Stein, will be having a show in which she will be our guest. And so we hope this will be a show in which we will discuss the broad outlines of her policy and what are the obstacles that she faces as a third party candidate in the U.S. elections. So we hope you will join us. This should be coming up in less than 2 weeks. So we look forward to doing that with you. Thank you and goodbye. So let us look back at the date of this wonderful transcription, of their live stream. And let's see if we can grab the date of it. The date of it was April 9th. So 2 weeks from April 9th is April 23rd. And that is 4 days, from now. So keep watch for that. Keep watch for it 4 days from now. Because maybe Radhika and Mike will be giving advice to Jill Stein on that program. And I'd be very interested to see this for a number of reasons. First, they may be giving advice on to how to control the capitalist classes. And second, they may be giving advice on what the economic policies are that Jill Stein should be following. And if those economic policies are in part from Mike Hudson, then those economic policies are going to be consistent, okay, with MMT. And this is a big change because in previous years, Jill Stein had been taking advice from the American Monetary Institute scholars who had particular ideas on what to do about the reform of money, okay, in the United States. And those theorists have been right along controlling the economic policies of the Green Party. One of the schools of thought that Michael Hudson has been in disagreement with is the AMI school of thought. At various times, he's been close to the AMI people. He knows their work, okay, extremely well, but he's been opposed to it and publicly opposed to it in conferences where they were critical of the MMT approach to economics, and Michael was defending that particular approach. So the fact that Radhika and Michael are advising the Green Party suggests that the economic policies of the Green Party will be moving closer to those that arise out of the MMT approach, okay, to economics, but also with a strong component of socialism thrown in as well, because I believe both Michael and Radhika are socialists. And so it will be very interesting to see how they get involved with the Green Party this time around. So, I did want to call attention to a few other things here. I don't think I mentioned the book Killing the Host. I think I went right by it. I believe this was How Financial Parasites and Debt Destroy the Global Economy. I think this was written in the period of the Great Crash as well, 2008 to 2009. There's also the book J is for Junk Economics. I didn't say anything about that. That was a book that I believe Michael was writing in the 2013 to 2014 period, but I may be wrong about that. But as you see, he is extremely prolific. And there's this book, And Forgive Them Their Debts. This is about lending, foreclosure, and redemptions from Bronze Age finance, okay, to the Jubilee year, when in some ancient societies, all debts were forgiven. And there were very good economic reasons for that. And this occurred every 7 years in some of those societies. And Michael has a very interesting book on that subject, okay, as well. So, to summarize some of what we said here, both Michael Hudson and Radhika Desai are major thinkers in geopolitics, okay, and geoeconomics. And they both have strong historical backgrounds too. This piece that we've discussed here and talked about here, as you can see, is a very, very fine piece and pulls no punches in talking about the ridiculousness of the U.S. economic war, okay, against China and the dimensions of that economic war. We've already seen that Janet Yellen looks like an absolute idiot in terms of her visit, okay, to China. But we're also seeing, and this takeaway is a very, very important takeaway, that if we don't have an industrial policy which involves planning our industries and uh, further developing, our industries, there is no way that we will be able to, I don't even want to say compete with China, but simply coexist with China and Russia, and the BRICS nations. We won't be able to keep up with them. We will become a backwater. We are already, as a number of economists have noted over a period of time, a stagnant economy. They are not stagnant economies. And the reason why they are not stagnant economies is because neither China nor Russia lets its capitalists actually run things. In both of these nations, even though Russia is not, of course, technically a socialist state, it still has a government that runs things for the public purpose and that seems to legislate, in the interests of its people, not in the interests, of its capitalists. And that's perhaps why its economy has survived all the sanctions that have been thrown at it by the collective West. Uh, Both countries keep the fire sector small. Both countries keep the fire sector under control. And both countries are doing very well in the various economic sectors that have been mentioned, in this article. And they will continue to do well. And the BRICS countries will begin doing well if they mimic what China and Russia, um, is doing. Countries that mimic what the United States is doing in giving primacy to the fire sector will stagnate and will join the United States as the future backwaters of this world. We can do something about it. And now I'm going to come back to a major theme of my streams over the last year and a half. That major stream is we must gain control of the political system again if we want to avoid the state of a stagnating economy and a failed state. We must grab control of the political system again from the economic oligarchs. And to do that, we all know, those of you watching this stream should know by now that the way we do that is through dump the corruption. We have to dump, the corruption. So, again, what do we do to dump the corruption? I will show again the rule for voters, because I will never give up on this rule. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, from individuals, from PACs or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. That is still the rule. It is the rule that will allow us to grab control of the political system and eventually the economy from the oligarchs. And I believe that is what we have to do. I better get the rule back because I'll probably need it again for sure. But I don't think I'm sharing it anymore. No, I am not. So let us go to our comments again. Greg Mallard is here at 8. He said, I'm confused about something. Why are we allowing our government to be beholden to a foreign entity in which we have no military treaty with? Are you talking about Israel? I gather, Greg. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello. Kay Ryan says, hi, Joe and Steve. Steve says, hi, Kay. Kay says, where is everybody tonight? Kay says, well, I'm out of here. Okay. I'm sorry, Kay. I'm sorry you're out of here. I don't know where everybody is tonight. Maybe something is going on. Something really important, maybe going on that's pulling everybody away. Or maybe they just weren't that interested in what Michael Hudson and Radhika Desai and myself commenting on them had to say. I'm sorry for that, but, if it's the way things are, that's the way things are. I think that article by them or that live stream by them was a brilliant live stream. Touches on many of the problems, many of the solutions to the problems we have today, and many of the problems we have today as well. I think the analysis was brilliant, and I think if we want to not fight an economic war with China, but pay attention to developing ourselves, we need to listen to them, and we need also to listen to the dump the corruption advice, because that is the key to the whole thing. And it's a key that they do not talk about, of course. So they don't really know how to grab control back. But the dump the corruption movement actually does. And on that note, I am going to leave you for tonight. I'm going to be ending this stream. I'm going over to D's show, and I may be on with Dee tomorrow night, on Saturday night as well, because I often am. And then I will see you again next Tuesday, when I will take us back to international relations. I do hope that more of the shows next week can be on domestic politics here in the United States. There are many interesting things to discuss, but this week has been consumed with international relations because we have been very close to escalating to, a nuclear war. I hope that the restrained retaliation of Israel to Iran over the last couple of days suggests that this current crisis is ending and we're back to trying to deal with the genocide. That is a big enough problem to try to handle. We really didn't need to have a regional war in the Middle East, as well. So for now, good night, and I will see you at D's show if you follow me there. Good night.